So we touched briefly on activities last week. We're going to revisit a couple of things and look in a bit more detail about them this week. So we'll have a quick look at an overview. We'll look at the life cycle of an activity. So what methods can we hook into at the different points an activity starts, stops, and what have you. We'll touch again on layouts and measurement units. We'll look briefly at a different type of layout, just as an example. And then we'll look at how we can go from one activity to another and pass data between those activities. And then we'll revisit something that comes up in an earlier slide, which is the fact that we can lose data if we, like, for example, rotate our application while we're using it, or our device while we're using our application. So according to the Android documentation, an activity should be a single focused thing that the user can do. So typically it's just a full screen window, a thing that just appears and fills up the screen of your phone or your tablet. It is possible for it to be like a floating window, and it's also possible to build an activity out of other activities called fragments. So we'll look at fragments either just before or just after Christmas, and they're a good way of sort of separating the various responsibilities of our of the things we put on the screen into their own sort of unit. So this diagram here shows the life cycle of an Android activity. We've got various methods we can hook into where different things happen within the life cycle of the activity. So first thing that happens is onCreate is called. Okay. Then we've got methods on start and resume, and by that point our activity is running. Okay. If, for example, another activity comes into the foreground, we might get on pause. If the activity goes off screen, we'll get on stop, and then we're getting on destroy, and the activity shuts down. Certain different things can happen, like we can return to an activity. So let's say it's gone off screen because we're showing another activity. We come back to it. We might get on restart rather than on create, and then we'll go back into on start. And so on and so forth. So knowing how things work, and it's quite often you might have to come back and look at this diagram, is kind of useful to know what's going on. And again, it's also possible that the app process is killed because something else needs more memory. So it might go off screen, it might stay active, and we might get on restart, or it might be killed, in which case we go back to on create. Okay, but one of those two is going to have to be called depending. And onCreate would always have to be called right at the start, the first time we launch it. There are some other methods we can hook into. One is called onSaveInstantState. Unfortunately, as I said already, rotating the device actually kills our activity and creates it again. Now that's kind of annoying if we've got some data, so we've collected the user's name and put it into like a text view or something. If we rotate our phone, that disappears. Well, that's not going to be very helpful for the user. So both onSaveInstantState and the onCreate method have something called a bundle that they have access to, the parameters for those methods, and we can use that bundle to store data. Okay, if our application is actually going to be closed down and we want to write stuff to disk, we could do that, for example, in something like on pause. But we'll revisit that in a bit once we've had a look at sort of passing data between activities. So just to recap on layout, obviously. Different Android devices can have different screen sizes. We get tablets, we've got phones. I have a feeling that things like, I don't know if you've used one of those sort of things where you can order your McDonald's off a screen. It wouldn't surprise me if even that was running something like Android, or was running Android to do it. So obviously, we need to make sure that the apps we design work on various different sized devices. But we don't want to provide pixel values because the resolution, we could actually have a phone with a higher resolution than like a full HD screen like this one here. So we don't want to be providing pixel values. So instead we use those device or density independent pixels, which I'll come on to in a minute. The other thing to bear in mind is we've got different types of layouts. We looked briefly at constraint layout last week, and just to remind you that to some extent we can just drag things on. It's easier if we've got this auto connect enabled, which is the sort of little magnet thing. And if we click infer constraints, it will often infer constraints in the way we might want them. But there are other layouts available. So I'll touch on that briefly, but we're not going to go into any great detail. I have linked to a very good lecture from the Stanford Android course on the Moodle page, so you can have a look at that if you're really interested in all the different layouts. But we'll have a brief look at that now. Okay, so we'll create a new project. We'll quickly do like a basic screen using constraint layout, and then we'll look at how we might do a similar thing using a linear layout. So what should we call this? Activity demo app. Target API 14, and we'll start with an empty activity. Okay. So just let that build. Okay, so if we have a look in our, when this layout goes back to being how we might expect, have a look in our layout, we've got our main activity, and you can see we've got text view in there at the moment. I can remove that text view. It should be showing the componentry, and I'm just wondering why that's not happening yet. But we should, I'm just going to delete that. Oh, okay, and it's updated now. So we've deleted that. And you can see we've got a constraint layout by default. So with auto connect enabled, if I drag on, say, I think this time we're gonna use another activity to collect the user's name. So I'm gonna shove in a little text view there. Might expand it a little bit if I can grab it. If we make this a little larger, it'll be easier to see. And we'll up the font size a bit. We can do that. If we go to all attributes, and we should find a text size. So we go for like 24 scalable pixels. Did that do it? Where's it gone? Text size, no, it didn't save. 24. There we go, so that's a little larger. We can see that there. I'll stretch it out a little bit more. And then we can add on a button. And again, if we're lucky, it will infer a constraint. It hasn't done to the top, but if I click this infer constraints button, there we go. Okay, so what it's actually done is it's kind of constrained it to the bottom. So that doesn't always do exactly what we want it to do, because actually I'd like it to be a fixed distance from the text view. I don't want it to be a fixed distance from the bottom, because if I have a taller device, my button will be further apart from my text view. So this is a point where we might want to go in here and have a quick look. Unfortunately, I've updated Android Studio, and it seems not to be putting all the various attributes on new lines, which makes it a tad harder to see what's going on, but we can fix that. And then we can have a look. So we've got, if we go back here, we've got our text view, and then we don't want our button constrained to the bottom. You see here we've got the constrained bottom to bottom of parent with a massive bottom margin. Well, let's get rid of that. And the bottom margin. And actually, what we really want to do is constrain the top to the bottom of the text view. So if we start typing something like constraint, we'll probably find as a layout constraint, we want to get the top. So top, and then we want that to be to the bottom of, so why am I not seeing that? We should see top. Well, let's keep typing constraint underscore top. You've got to top of. I want to bottom of. Have I already got that in there? Oh yeah, there we go. It is, there we go. We have got constraint to the top of the text view. So there we go, that's good. It was already there, I'd missed that. So let's have a look at how that's looking now. Okay, well now it's just seems to be stuck underneath it. So let's see what else we're missing. How is our text view constrained? Well, that should be constrained to the parent, that's good. Maybe we want to add some sort of margin to the top. Let's say 16. Okay, that's moved our button down, but we seem to have lost our text view. So let's have a quick look at why that might be. Can anyone spot anything in there that Might be screwing up why we are, why we've lost our text view off the top of the screen. Okay, that's odd. Let's, you see it's sort of shoved it right up there. I'm not quite sure where that is. We'll take it out again, and we'll pop it back in, because that's another way of solving things. We'll put it there. We'll have a look at it. See, it's now got a constraint, so if we, but we've lost our constraint here. We can manually click add a constraint, so let's try that, and have a quick look at the text. So we've got our text view. It's now constrained to top of the parent. It doesn't. I can't actually spot anything different. Maybe we can review the video later and find out what's different. But we seem to now have the constraints that we want, and we've not got any constraint at the bottom. Okay, so it is a bit fiddly. So there are other types of layout now. Constraint layout should let you do pretty much anything you can do with the other types of layout. But sometimes the other types of layout are kind of easier to work with. So I'm going to add another activity just to have a quick look at those. So I'm going to just create another empty activity. I'm going to call this linear activity because we're going to use a linear layout for it. Okay. So by default, if we have a look at our linear layout XML, it's already got a constraint layout in it. Now that's not what I want. I actually want a linear layout, but we might find that if we try and remove this constraint layout, it doesn't actually remove it. The delete doesn't help us do it. We can remove it in code, but actually it's got a few things that we actually kind of need that specify like the schemas for things like tools, which are determine how things look in the previewer. So what we'll do instead is I'm actually going to drag in a linear layout, a vertical linear layout, and you'll notice that appears inside the constraint layout, okay, which is not quite what I want. I mean, it will do the job if I make the linear layout fill the constraint layout, but I don't really need an extra layout for any particular reason. So what I can do is I can specify that this particular linear layout will match its parent in the same way the constraint layout did. We don't actually want these absolute values for how it's going to be displayed, so I'm going to scrap those. But what I will do is need these schemas, so I'm going to copy those into my linear layout, and the context as well. Okay, so now I've got that, what I can do is actually scrap the constraint layout, being careful not to remove the top XML element. Okay, now it doesn't look any different, except it just says linear layout here now. So what did we have before? Well, we had a text view with a button below it. So if I now drag those elements in, they'll automatically sit at the top. So I can still change its text size and height like I did before. So we had sort of text size of 24 SP. It's automatically done the height. We hadn't got around to centering it, but I probably should center it. For some reason, when I tried this earlier, the center, the alignment didn't appear. I could not find it. It probably is here, but I could not find it in this list. However, you can get to it in the XML. So let's say we wanted to align. If I start typing alignment, text alignment, and then we can set that to center. Go back to the design. I wanted a button as well, so I can just drag a button. And because we're using a linear layout, I can't like put it next to it. I can just put it above or below. So that actually can make life a little easier for us. Obviously, we can change the padding on the button and set a width if we wanted to. But pretty much anything that we drag into there will just sit above and below it. So sometimes that's simpler. Similarly, we can nest layouts. So if I was to drag a layout like a horizontal one in here, I've got another layout here. I can then drag, for example, let's say I want a couple of buttons in there. I can drag those in, but they will sit, they will sit next to each other, okay? If we have a look at the XML for those, you'll see, there we go. We've got, we look at this, we've got this layout weight, okay? So the layout weight determines like how much of the width it will take up compared to the other one. So if I make the first one a weight of 2, this should take up 2 out of 3 units of width. So if I go back to the design, there we go, you can see that one widened to take up the space. So if you're struggling with constraint layout, these other layouts are available. However, pretty much anything you can do in those other layouts, you can do in a constraint layout. Okay, where are we? Yeah, so as I say, there's more information in that lecture link from the Moodle space. Just to recap, measurement units, if we're using, if we're setting size of sort of elements, we use density independent pixels. And if we're setting text sizes, we should use this scalable pixels value. We shouldn't use regular pixels. I mean, the only reason you might do that if you were designing an Android app that you knew were only ever going to run on a particular device and you knew what the resolution of that screen size was and you knew that was never going to change, then maybe you could make an argument for doing that. But that's unlikely to be the case for what most people are doing. It's also possible to specify different resources for different screen densities. So we will actually touch on this, although it's not a requirement for anything you're assessed on. We will basically, if you think if you take a sort of low resolution screen, if you design an image to appear on that screen and it's got a certain width and height in pixels, if you then try and display it on a high resolution screen, it's either going to display really tiny, or it's going to become like kind of pixelated and blocky. So what we can do is specify different versions of the same image for display on different resolution screens. Okay, we will touch on that in one of the tasks we do, I think, after Christmas. Okay, so this is kind of the meat of things that we're going to look at today is switching activities. So obviously, we don't necessarily, it's unlikely that we're going to do everything in one activity. If we've only got if anything other than a really simple application, we're probably going to need a bit more than that. So in order to sort of transition from one activity to the other, we can create something called an intent, and the intent references the other activity by name, and specifically we actually pass it something that refers to the sort of Java version of its class. So the syntax is a bit weird. We have like the name of the other activity. So in a minute I'll create we'll create another activity, and we'll write the code and we'll see how we do that. But it's obviously behind the scenes, most of Android is written in Java, so we have to pass it like the Java version of its class. That's like an intent of what we want to do, and then to actually start the activity, we call start activity, and pass that intent into that method. We'll come back to that in a minute. I'll do a bit of a demo. So if we go back to our main activity, at the moment we've got a button and a text view. Now, what I want to do, other than make my text view a bit bigger so actually we can see anything that's displayed in it, and maybe make the font a little larger. I think I did it in the other one, but not in this one. Text size 24 SP. There we go. Is I'd like to have the user press a button and actually go to another activity, and when they're on that other activity, I want them to enter the data and then return to this activity and pass the data back again. Okay, because quite often we need to send data from one activity to another. So let's have a look at how we might do that. Let's create another activity. We'll call it something like data entry activity. So we can just right click on our application, and we can add most things to our project like this. So we go to new activity and choose empty activity. Okay, it's worth noting that if we could do it manually. We could create a Kotlin file and we could create an XML file. But actually, by doing it this way, it will add an entry to our Android manifest file. So if I click empty activity, and I create this, what I call it, data entry activity, and hit finish. If we were to look in our manifest file, there'd be a reference to that. So there's our linear activity we created earlier, and here's our data entry activity. Okay. Obviously, if we're going to remove something, like we might remove our linear activity because we're done with it, we can simply delete it from there. And then deleting can be a bit complicated because it tries to do like a safety check. So if I just try and delete linear activity from here, it will say, do you want to say safe delete? And I say OK, and then it will say, we've got problems and it's not safe to delete, okay? Because it's basically found the equivalent, even though we've already deleted it from the manifest, it's found its XML file. So if we delete from the manifest and we want to get rid of it, the easiest way is to make sure we select both the activities Kotlin file and its XML file, and then try and delete those, and then it'll be okay. Okay, so we've got rid of those now. So we've got this new activity we want to go to. I want to quickly set up the UI for that activity. So again, what I want is an edit text component. We'll just collect, we'll do, I think, plain text for now. So I'll drag that in, center it, well, let's infer constraints. So we get top constraint, and then we'll add a button to that. Again, can we infer, if it confers constraints, will it go the right way? Yes, it has. Good. And then we could, for example, change the text in our button to something like done, and then we'll get a warning because we've got hard-coded text, and then we can fix that and extract that. Oh, that's the name one. We don't want that. We actually want to remove name from the box because we don't want to say name. But we should have another hard-coded text one. Fix that and extract the string resource. Okay. We can also specify like help for how it's being filled in, but I won't worry about that just now. Okay, so let's think about how we can go about getting from one activity to the other. Okay, well, if we go back to our main activity, we need to add an event handler for our button. So I'm going to do that via the XML because it's the easiest way of doing it. So I'll look in my text, and I will add a onClick handler, and I'll specify that we're going to call a method called, I don't know, load data activity. I'll just copy that so I get it right when I put it in my Kotlin. Then I'll return to my main activity, and we'll add a new method. We'll call it load data activity, and it has to take a view as a property, and we'll have to import that. And then we'll write our code. So we want to, load activity. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, we create this intent object, which I'll call intent for now. Again, we'll have to import intent. And then we have to pass it, well, there's various different overloads for it, but the one we're interested in is the one that allows us to specify a class, and the simplest one that allows us to specify a class just also requires us to provide a context. So that's this one here. Now, a context can be things like an activity, it can be things like a service that we'll cover later. If you were to look at the inheritance chain, you'll find that eventually activity, even activity, will inherit from context, which is an abstract class, and we'll look at abstract classes later in the year. So actually, although it's still asking for a context, I can pass this, because this activity is a context. And then we have to pass the name of our class, which I've called data entry activity, and I actually have to pass, rather than not just the name of the class, I have to pass the reference to the Java implementation of that class. Okay, so that's our intent. Essentially, the only thing that would vary there if we were doing it for a different activity is the name of the activity. The rest of it's pretty standard. And then we can start the activity. And we can pass the intent in as a parameter. So what should happen if I've got everything right is that when I run the application, it will load this activity when we click the button. So we'll try it out. Okay, so we should find when we click this, there we go, it's presented that other activity. Now what I really want to do is put my name in here and click done and it be done, but I can't. I can get back, if I dismiss the keyboard, I can hit the back button, but that's not really the way we want to do it, because that would imply that actually we want to cancel our operation. Actually we want to do it when we hit this button. Or the button that's on this screen. Okay, so we need to add some logic to that to make that work, to essentially send that data back. Okay, so again, we're going to need an event handler for that button. Again, the sort of quick and easy way is to do it via an event handler in the XML. But what we can do if I go to my data entry, is to actually add the method first, and then we can pick it from a drop down, which is like even more easy. So I'm going to say fun send data back. Again, because we're going to call it from a button, we have to pass that button as a parameter, and we have to import view. Okay, so we can hook that up in the XML by having looked down our little thing here, and we should find somewhere when I click on the, yep.
How did you turn that red view into?
Oh, how do, okay, yep. So I used the keyboard shortcut, but there's a couple of ways of doing it. So we've got a red view, yeah? So we can do Option on the Mac, probably Alt, probably on a Windows PC. If we get it back again, it did come up with a, there we go. Can you see here it's saying android.view.view, and then we've got this little shortcut, okay? So that's the shortcut key I need to press to add the import statement manually, automatically. So if you're on a Windows machine and you hover over it or put the cursor there, you'll probably see something like Control or Alt and Enter. So on Mac, I can press Option or Alt and Enter, and it will add import android.view.view. Alternatively, if you're not seeing that, you should see a little light bulb pop up. We can normally get the light bulb to pop up. Come on, give me the light bulb. I swear it does it sometimes when it feels like it. Give me the light bulb. Okay, it's not giving me the light bulb. We can right click probably, no. Can normally get a little light bulb, and the light bulb will give you that same option. We could, you know, import android.view.view, and then it will go away. That's the manual way of doing it. I'm not sure why the light bulb's not popping up.
But the other thing would pop up anyway.
The other thing should pop up if you get the cursor in the right place and wait the right amount of time. It's a bit fiddly, but once you've learnt that keyboard shortcut, which I say on the Mac is Option and Enter or Alt, and then depending on the keyboard, and whatever it is on Windows, you can just do that every time. So we've got our method doesn't do anything yet, but we want to hook it up to our XML. So we should find with the button selected, if I can click on the button, it's got an on-click drop down, so I can change it to send data back. So that will just add a reference in the XML to do the same thing wherever it is. Where's my button? Let's probably put it in. There you go. Android on-click, send data back. Okay. Okay. So what do I need to do to send the data back? Well, we create an intent like we did last time. Okay. Let's rather than just start by doing that. Just knowing how we can actually dismiss the activity is also useful, okay? That's really easy. If we want to say we're done, we just call finish, okay? So if I do that and run the application or restart it, what we should be able to do is just hit this and it will finish it. There you go, it goes back to the main screen, okay? But if we want to send data back, we need to do a bit more. We need to create an intent. Okay, and we can use, again, we've got this import thing. It's not going to give you the light bulb. Oh, we've given you the light bulb this time. If you get the light bulb, you can use the light bulb and you can say import. Okay, I have no idea why I didn't get the light bulb when I was trying to do it for view, but it's given me it for intent, and then it will add that content.intent. I could have used this keyboard shortcut as well. So an intent allows us to store values in it using key value pairs. So, and they're called extras. So I can say like intent dot, and then put extra, okay? And I can store all sorts of different types of data in my intent with a key to reference them, okay? So I want to store the text or the name that the user's typed in. So that type of extra would be a string. But we don't have to store just strings. We can store all sorts of types of data. And one thing that's quite important to be aware of is that we can actually pass something that implements serializable. So if you remember last year, we implemented serializable to store things to disk nice and easily. If we create a class and we implement serializable for it, we can store all our values in a class and just put one extra, which implement any class that implements serializable, and then we can pull that data back out the other end. So it's worth being aware that that's available to us. But as I say, I'm just doing a string for now, so I'm going to do this put extra string. The first thing I give it is a key, so which is a key name, because that's what we're collecting. And then what we want to do here is get the value from the edit text. I didn't name it, so it's probably got a default value of edit text. Yep, that's what it's called. If we look in the XML, we see its ID as edit text. And then we want to get its text. Now, if we note here that text actually gives us an object of type editable, I don't really want to be passing an editable. I want to be passing a string, so I'm going to convert that to string. Okay, so I've now got an intent with an extra. Now, finish takes us back to the activity we're going to go to anyway, so we don't actually have to say, you know, where that intent is going to go. Simply, basically say that we're setting some sort of result, okay? And we can set a result that says everything's okay or everything's not okay, and we can pass the intent along with that as the data, okay? It's asked there are two parameters there we had. If we take the option with an intent. One is a result code, okay? So that's just an integer, but they're defined as constants, so we can do like activity dot, and then we've got these three options here, like result okay, result first user, and result cancelled. Turns out result first user is if you want to specify like your own sort of result, which you have to do differently. But we're going to do result okay, okay. And then we also have to pass the intent. Unfortunately, that's not quite it, okay? The activity that launched this one needs to, one, say that it's going to expect something when it comes back. So here I did start activity, but there's actually another method that I need to call, which is start activity for result, okay? And when I do that, as well as passing in an intent, I also have to pass in a request code, which is like an integer. Okay, so that I can use to make sure that if, for example, there are different activities that could be launched from this application, I know which application is sending me the data back later. Okay, so again, we can choose what number we want. We just need to make sure we use that same number later on. So for now, I'm just going to use the date, which is 25th. Okay, but we'll come back and look at this better in a minute. Okay, so if I do start activity for result, it's now going to expect something to come back. Okay, from here we'll get whatever the user's typed in, set it as an extra in the intent, and pass the intent back along with the result saying everything's okay. And then we need to find a way of handling it inside our activity. Okay, so there is a method that we can override, which is called onActivityResult. Okay, and that has three parameters. It has a request code, which you probably figured out is going to be this for the activity we've got, a result code, which hopefully is okay, and some data, which is an intent. Okay, so what we want to do at this point is start doing some checks. So we might first of all say something like, have we got the right activity? So if request code is 25, okay. Now this seems a bit sort of, you know, arbitrary. And you notice that if we're using, like, for example, well, we were back in our data entry, we're using this activity.resultOK, and if we were to look at that, at least in Java, you see, although it is an integer with the value of -1, it's just a constant, okay? So we could do similar in our Kotlin code and specify our own constant for that particular activity. So what we might do is go back to main activity and say something like, let data what have I called it? Data entry activity equal, and then we just give it a value. Oh, it shouldn't be let, it should be val because we're in Swift, Kotlin, not Swift. And I don't know, we're going to give it 1. Doesn't really matter what value. And then if we had other ones, other activities, we could use different result codes to make sure that we can differentiate them. So now I can use data, where's it gone? Data entry activity, and I use that same one here. And it now makes a bit more sense. Okay. So we've got the right request code. We then want to check that the result code is okay. So we can use result okay. And then assuming that is, we can like do something with the data. Okay. So how do we get the data back out of the intent? Anyone like to take a guess? So if I put the code up for putting the activity, the data into an intent, which looks like this, put extra. Anyone like to figure out how we might get the data out of the intent. So our intent is called data at this point. What method might I call on data to get the extra? It's not a trick question. Get, yeah. So data dot get. Let's. And then, okay, so we've got all these various methods for get. The one that I want isn't actually on screen, but can anyone guess what it might be? Well, if we look at the ones we've got things like get boolean extra, get byte extra, get char extra. What did I put in? What did I store? What was the user's name? What type of data is that? A string? Any guess what the method could be? So if I'd stored an integer, we'd probably get it out with get int extra. Yeah, get string extra. Okay. And then we've obviously got to pass in the name of the extra. So that has got to match whatever we've called it here, in this case, name. So I will get that string extra. Okay. Now, thing we need to be aware of is, one, we're not storing it anywhere at the moment, and two, in theory, data can be null. Okay. So I've had to use a question mark here. It will complain if I don't. I need to make a safe call. So this will return like an optional string. So we can say val name equals. Now really, I only want to store that in the, or put it into the text view if it actually exists. So I might do a check like if name is not null, then I can say text view. It looks like it's called text view 2. I'm just going to double check that because it's probably because I took one out and added one in as my main activity. Where's its ID? Yeah, it has got an ID of text view 2. I'm going to just make it text view because I've only got one, so it kind of makes sense. So text view dot text equals name. Okay. And although it wants a char sequence, it will accept a string. So that seems happy with that. Okay. Now, obviously, we could do like a check and say, well, actually, we'll set it to if it's null, we'll set it to an empty string, but we might not want that because at the moment, what does it say if we launch it? Does it say text view? Oh, it doesn't. Doesn't really matter. But if it had some default data in it, so let's say we'd done something like gone here and then added some text. Your name will appear here. Okay. Probably should make that into a string resource. So we'll just fix that. We might want that to appear rather than a blank string. Okay. So this is why we check if it's null. If we were decided that actually we would give it like a blank string if it was empty, instead of like checking it was null, we could say something like text view dot text equals name, and then that, because that can be null, we can use the Elvis operator, so to specify an alternate value like no name entered. Okay, and then we wouldn't need to do this. Okay, hopefully you came across that when you did the reading in one of the weeks where we looked at Kotlin. Just as a reminder, what happens here is it checks this value and see if it actually has, if it's got a value, string value, if it's null, or any type of value that's nullable. And then if it is null, it sets whatever we're trying to do, or it puts into the variable the thing on the other side of the operator. Okay, and it's called the Elvis operator because if you turn it sideways and look at it with the two dots as the eyes, the question mark looks like Elvis's hair. No joke. That's why it's called the Elvis operator. So yeah, so it's worth being aware of that. So we'll leave it with this option, which will just take the value from the XML if we don't specify anything. So all being well, provided I haven't forgotten anything, which is ever so likely, we should be able to get the data from one activity and pass it to the other. So we'll try it out and see what happens. So, oh, I've probably screwed up the layout when I've done it, but never mind that for now. I'll hit the button, Oh, I've put it in the wrong. I've put the text in the wrong. That's why. What I've done is I've put the text in the data entry activity, and it shouldn't appear there. Let's just take that out. It should actually be in the main activity, which is also why I changed the name of the text view, which is why that's screwed up. So now I've fixed it, and I go back to here. I can specify the text for that box. I would have said text view. It will now say your name will appear here, except it's not long enough. So we'll stretch it out a bit more. Okay, so let's try that again. Now I've tried to fix up the screw up. There we go. So all being well, it should capture that data. It should put it into intent, and there we go. It's put it into the text box. Okay. Any questions so far on anything I've done? No? Okay. So it's all well and good, but this is my application. I'm just going to rotate it. Oh, what? Did anyone spot that? Before it had my name, and I hit rotate, and it's gone back to saying your name will appear here. Maybe that's just an accident. Let's try it. Done. Done. All right, it's there. Let's flip it back. Oh, as soon as I flip it back, it disappears. Okay. Now, what is happening here is the application is actually like terminating the activity and then restarting it. And we can prove that by implementing some of those methods from the activity lifecycle here. So we've got on create, on start, on resume, on pause, on stop, and on destroy. So let's put some of those into our main activity and set some breakpoints and have a look at that happening. So we've got on pause, we've got on stop, was it? We've got on destroy. And maybe we'll just put in this, we've got on create already, we'll add on start and on resume and see what happens. So let's see, we've got on create. So on start and on resume. No, not on restart, on resume. Okay, so I'm going to set breakpoints to each of these. And I'll also set one in on create up here. And we will have a look and see what happens. Okay, so I'll stop my application. I'll start it again from scratch. Oh, no, I didn't hit debug. That's no good. I'll stop it again. I'll hit debug. Try again. Okay, so our application is launching from scratch this time. So on create has been called. Great, we can continue. Okay, on start has been called, and on resume has been called. Okay, so now our application should be running. It is. Okay, I'm going to hit the button to go to the other activity. Now on pause has been called. On stop has been called. And there we go. So on pause and on stop has been called. But on destroy hasn't been called. So let's go back to our emulator. Let's just type, I don't know, Andrew in again. Hit done. So our main activity is now starting again. It's resuming. And we're up and running again. Now, that's probably what we expect, but let's rotate it and see what happens there. So I've rotated it. Our application has been paused, stopped, destroyed. So it didn't even get destroyed when we launched a different activity. It's then been created again and started and resumed. Okay, but we've lost the text that we had in here. So we need to think about how we can go about fixing that. So what we didn't see on that that activity lifecycle diagram is a method called onSaveInstantState. Okay, and that gets called when the application is shutting down, or the activity has been sort of closed at some point, or at least being paused, I think, and allows us to put items into something called a bundle. Okay, so I'm going to implement that, and I'm going to take that the value from the text view and pop it in the bundle, and then we'll work out how we can get it back out again. So I'm going to implement this onSaveInstantState. Now there's two two overloads for this method, and I'm interested in the one that isn't the persistent state, the one with the least number of parameters. Okay, so that's this one here, which just hasn't something called a bundle. Okay, and what I want to do is I want to take the value from that text view and shove it in the bundle, and then get it back out again when the activity restarts. So out state is a bundle. It is optional, but it's pretty much going to be there. But we have to use a safe call on it. And just like the extras, we've got get and put for various types of data. So I'm going to say put string. It's not really an extra, so it's just put string. Again, we give it a key, so I can use that same key I used before. I mean, it doesn't have to be the same key because it's a different thing we're working with. And then I'm going to say text view dot view. Why am I not getting that text view? Oh, sorry, text view dot text even. Now that's a character sequence, and I don't think it will let me convert it to a string without doing this. It's not. Yep. So now we could convert it to a string, and then I need some way of getting the bundle back again when the application relaunches. Now, or the activity launches. Sorry. So there is a method called onRestore instant state, and again, there's two overloads for that one with a persistent state. But we don't actually have to do that, because if we have a look up here, you'll see that onCreate also has a parameter of the saved instant state passed in. So what I can do is something like, and I want to do it after the content view is set, is to say something like text view dot text equals saved instant state, which is the name of our bundle here. Again, it's optional, or it's a nullable, so I can do a safe call, get string. And there's two versions, okay? There's one that gives a nullable string, and the other that you provide a default value for. And what I didn't mention is, if we use get extras from an intent, like we were putting data into an intent earlier, if we try and get an extra that's an integer, the method for doing that forces us to provide a default value. Okay, so we have to think about that as well. So here, I think if it's null, I don't want to do anything. So I don't want to do anything. So I'm going to get the nullable option. So I'm going to just use get string. And we called it name, didn't we? That was the key for it. And then this should work, except it could be null, and we don't really want to pass null into our text view. It might work, it might not. I don't really want to risk it. I'd rather be sort of secure in my code. So I'm going to say val name equals, which is a nullable string, and then I'm going to say if name is not null, then our text view dot text is going to be equal to name. Okay, and that should go green. I don't think it realised that. I think it's probably not realising that get string, even though we're calling it on something null, could be null, because normally we'd get this safe cast, but it's not showing us that. But anyway, that's a safer option. So what should happen now is I should be able to rotate it without concern. So if I run it, okay, let's hit the button, let's pop my name in, let's hit done. Okay, it's there. I should be able to rotate it back again. I've gone upside down, so it's not going to work. That won't count as rotation, but that will count as rotation, and it's still there. Okay, so we have managed to persist that data on app rotation.